Welcome to the webinar Local Solutions for Global Challenges, Regional Climate Action Projects and their Impact. This webinar is the fourth webinar of our Climate Action Chapter webinar series. We already discussed 3 different topics. If you want to check them out, the recordings are available, and we will have 2 more webinars. Feel free to check out the landing page and sign up for the other webinars as well. We will start with some housekeeping rules. Please send any question you have through our question box. We will discuss the questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A sessions. If we don't have time to answer all your questions, all questions will be noted and we will follow up by email. I'm happy to introduce you to today's speakers. We have Uta Hönemann, Senior Sustainability Advisor, joining us from Berlin today. We have Anja Moser, a Senior Sustainability Advisor, joining us from Zurich. And we have Jasmin Schwegli, she's a Regional Manager for European Projects, also joining us from Zurich. My name is Ramon, and I'm today's host. The agenda of today's webinar is as follows. We will set the scene at the beginning, then we will discuss different technologies and project types. We will then look at some examples of regional climate action projects, and at the end we will do a deep dive into climate action through feed additives. And as mentioned before, we will end the webinar with the Q&A. For those who don't know South Pole, we are an award-winning sustainability solution provider and project developer. We are based in more than 30 offices all around the world, and we're happy to bring you the topic of regional climate action a bit closer to you. And with that, I'm handing over to Uta. Uta, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ramon. Setting the scene. Europe is warming twice as fast as other continents, a fact that is still unknown to many. And already in 2022, Europe was approximately 2.3 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. Warming temperatures lead to melting glaciers and warming oceans, and to more extreme weather events, to heat waves and droughts, but also to heavy rainfall and storms. This is putting damage to infrastructure and biodiversity, disrupting livelihoods and ecosystems, and claiming lives. Research published this summer showed that more than 61,000 people died because of Europe's record-shattering heat wave in the summer of 2022. And what we saw this year and the last year might only be the beginning. 2023 is likely to be the hottest year in human history, and Europe's summer this year was the warmest on record. To put it short with the words of researcher Kimberly Nicholas, it's warming, it's true, we are sure, it's bad, and we can fix it. Land and the ocean serve as natural carbon sinks, absorbing large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. Conserving and restoring natural spaces everywhere around the world and the biodiversity they contain is essential for limiting emissions and adapting to climate impacts. And one way to fix the climate crisis is to act on our doorstep and to support regional climate protection projects across Europe, and those bring numerous benefits. First, they address specific environmental challenges within a particular area, and thus creating direct and immediate impact on local communities and ecosystems. The regional projects can also help communities to adapt to changing climate and build resilience against future climate-related risks. For example, implementing sustainable agriculture practices or improving water management systems. They also foster collaboration and promote the exchange of knowledge, expertise, and best practices among local communities, governments, and businesses. And by supporting regional climate protection projects, Europe can contribute to the collective global effort as well, and local solutions for global challenges, as we highlighted it in the webinar's title. And this is particularly crucial, as evidenced by discussions at global climate meetings among the international community. And investing in regional projects can yield exciting returns on benefits for your organization. Here are 3 of them. The first one, field visits. You and your team can go and visit the projects without causing a terrible amount of travel emissions compared to flying to climate projects in the global south. And observing the damage, witnessing the project's efforts to repair it, and engaging in conversations with the individuals involved can truly make a significant impact. It allows you also to build deeper and longer-term partnership with the projects. In August, my team and I had this realization when we visited the Harz, a region in the heart of Germany, where we witnessed the devastating impact of climate change and the bark beetle on the local forest. Where we discuss climate change regularly and on a daily basis in our job, the field visit had a strong impact on all of us. Experiencing firsthand a concrete example of climate change allowed us to truly comprehend its magnitude in a different way and to understand the necessity to act in also more deeply intuitive and profound manner. And second, choosing projects in the region where you operate allows you to engage clients, employees, and other partners. For example, this autumn we plan to offer credits from a reforestation project in Germany, covering different regions from east to west of the country. So feel free to contact us if you would like to inquire about projects in proximity to your operating sites. And last but not least, we all know getting climate communication right is not always easy, and regulation and guidance is not yet fully in place. Consumer watchdogs are ready to call it greenwashing, and consumers are exposed to a magnitude of generic green claims and advertising every day. So engaging in local projects presents a chance to craft compelling brand stories and visuals, providing concrete evidence of your commitment and efforts. And a variety of regional climate projects have been developed to date. So now I will pass the floor to my colleague Anja, who will provide you with an update on the latest technologies and types of projects.
Thanks a lot, Uta. After having heard why to act with regional projects on your doorstep, I would like to do a deep dive on what lies behind these projects. The question I would like to ask here is, what are the different technologies and the project types out there? Broadly said, we would like to talk about projects related to agriculture, technical carbon removals, reforestation and peatland restoration projects in the next few minutes. Please note hereby that this is in no way an exhaustive list, but rather should provide you with a snapshot of different project types in the region. Next slide, please. So one big project type we are currently looking at is agriculture. This is a broad category, and we encompass biochar, feed additives, as well as soil organic carbon as subcategories in this webinar. I would like to have a few words on biochar. Biochar is produced by heating biomass in the total or partial absence of oxygen, a process called pyrolysis. And pyrolysis is the most common technology employed to produce biochar. It also occurs in early stages of the combustion and gasification processes, as you might know. Now, what is the benefit of biochar in the agriculture sector? Biochar contributes to more sustainable agricultural practices by improving soil water retention and nutrient levels as well when applied to the ground. So when you put biochar on the ground, thus cutting also the need for chemical fertilizers, just to name 3 of the benefits of biochar. In the sake of time, I won't go into the details of soil organic carbon or feed additives, as particularly feed additives will be covered extensively later on by Jasmine in the last part of this webinar. Next slide, please. Technical carbon removals, a very exciting topic. This is the second type of regional projects I would like to shed light on. There are two types of tech removals, as we call them. First, to directly remove CO2 from the atmosphere, for example, through technologies such as DAC, so direct air capture that you might know from Climeworks, enhanced weathering, or also some mineralization practices. And then the second type, the removal via the biosphere through photosynthesis, where trees and plants, as we all know, are capturing the CO2 first before it comes into a capturing facility. For more on this later on when I present Airfix to you. Next slide, please. Reforestation, an important type, whereas afforestation refers to the process of establishing forests in areas where there was no previous forest cover. Reforestation, on the other hand, describes the planting of trees in areas of previously depleted or disturbed forest ecosystems, so in areas where there was forest present previously. Reforestation projects are a critical instrument for promoting sustainable land use. Why? They contribute to carbon sequestration, which is logic through the trees, but also the carbon sequestration helps mitigate climate change as forests act as the carbon sinks by absorbing the atmospheric CO2. Moreover, the forests also, and that's an important part, play a vital role in supporting biodiversity, providing a habitat for numerous plant and animal species as well. Last but not least, this leads me to the last project type, peatland restoration. Why last but not least? Because peatlands are so-called superheroes, similar to mangroves. Peatlands only cover around 0.3% of the global surface, so a very small amount, but they store 1/3 of the carbon. So only 0.3% of the surface, but storing 1/3 of the carbon, which makes them highly effective, so to say. But not only that, they're also critical for biodiversity and have a further co-benefit of serving as flood barriers. And after what we heard from Uta, this is definitely a co-benefit that we're all looking for. The issue is that they are cleared at alarming rates, and that is exactly why peatland restoration projects are so important. Next slide, please. This is a bit of a packed slide, but after having had a quick look into the broad project types, let's look at the details, so scalability and readiness, as well as the availability, the certifications, and the costs of specific technologies within those types. What I would like to highlight here or stress here, and what the different scalability levels as well as readiness levels show, is that it is important to have a portfolio approach when investing in climate action projects. This means investing in a variety of different technologies. This because each one has different trade-offs and different benefits. For example, one being more mature, another presenting high effectiveness and potentially lower prices, but not yet being available, meaning the maturity still being low. This being said, as you can see, some of the projects or technologies with the corresponding projects will only become available next year or even in 2026. Whereas others are already issuing credits today. Also, scalability varies a lot with, for example, a rather small expected size of the feed additives project market and highest scalability that we see in reforestation and biochar projects, biomass with carbon removal storage, which leads me directly to my last part, the presentation of a specific example project two specific example projects, including a bikers project called Airfix that I already teasered. Next slide, please. Airfix is a subsidiary of South Pole, and it's made possible by the Micro Pioneer Fund that some of you might know. Airfix aims at developing projects that capture biogenic CO2 from point source emitters in Switzerland and Europe. Now, what are point source emitters? These are, for example, biogas plants, biomass incineration plants, and waste to energy plants. And concretely, the initiative supports emitters to establish the CO2 transport and the storage logistics, so a very specific part of the whole value chain. That means what to do with the CO2 once it is captured. Also, it supports the emitters then in how to secure revenue streams through carbon finance, meaning certifying the captured CO2 in projects and helping with the sale of carbon credits afterwards. Talking about the credits, the first credits are expected very soon, well, from 2026 onwards, from Switzerland's largest biomass carbon capture project, a plant near Baden in the canton of Aargau, not far away from Zurich. That's all about Airfix. A second project I would like to present to you is CarboCert, a different project. CarboCert is a sustainable farming project in Germany and in Switzerland that basically aims at promoting earth-friendly farming practices by restoring the vital nutrient-rich topsoils, or in other words, humus. By restoring humus layers, the project not only enables soil to absorb and sequester large amounts of carbon, but also it reduces erosion and again, flood impacts. And on top of that, a fertile soil becomes a rich habitat for insects and wildlife, so to say. Also, the high nutrient contents means that crops thrive, which in turn ensures higher yields and also higher resilience. Talked about the flood impacts, and hence significantly also reduces the need for pesticides and fertilizers. It's a very charismatic project. We've also visited it, and yeah, the benefits were already talked about by Uta. I can highly recommend it. All right, after this insight into two projects, here just a quick map of some of the new projects on our books, amongst other also CarboCert on the top right, so that you get an idea on the geographical distribution and variety of projects. As you can see on the color, the different colors, apart from carbon credits, we also have plastic credits, plastic credit project, but I won't go into details here as this would be a topic for a whole separate webinar. What I would like to do instead is to shed a few words on standards, where climate action projects all adhere to internationally recognized standards. As you might know, standards establish the rules, the requirements, and also the procedures for all the stages of the development of the carbon project, meaning from issuance to monitoring. And they also establish requirements for criteria such as permanence or how to demonstrate additionality, as we've heard in a previous webinar of this Climate Chapter series. You here see on the slide a variety of different standards that are used for projects in Europe. These vary from internationally active standards such as Gold Standard or the Verified Carbon Standard, VCS, to more local standards such as the Waldklimastandard in Germany, or for example, the Woodland Standard in the UK. In terms of difference, they are very similar, so to say. However, each of the standards has a different focus. For example, the Gold Standard focusing more on co-benefits beyond emission reductions in developing countries and requiring there to be at least 3, for example, whereas the VCS has a wider scope of technology in its portfolio, with it being also able to measuring innovative technologies such as blue carbon. However, again, all of them have been developed with the ultimate aim and goal of validating climate action projects and their impact. And with that, I would like to hand over to Jasmine to make a deep dive into one of our feed additive projects called Move.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Anja. Yes, also a very warm welcome from my side. I'm happy to present to you a specific project type that we are currently implementing, and I'm going to talk about feed additives and how they can help combating climate change. So to set a bit of the context, oh, next slide, please. Yes, perfect. To set a bit of the context why we are talking about methane emissions from livestock and why are they relevant when we talk about climate change. So we all know that agriculture is a big contributor, namely 10% of the global annual greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the agriculture sector, and livestock is of course a big part of agriculture as well. But also when you just look at methane emissions in general, livestock is a main source, namely through manure emissions and enteric fermentation. Here, enteric fermentation is the process in the digestion system of ruminants, such as cows and goats, that leads to burping of methane emissions. And to quantify a bit like how important that actually is, these two sectors, manure emissions and enteric fermentation, account for 33% of global anthropogenic methane emissions, so making it a major source of anthropogenic methane emissions globally. Methane emissions from enteric fermentation vary depending on different factors, such as the livestock type. Obviously, a cow is going to have more methane emissions than a goat, but it also depends on the production system. So is it, for example, a high intensive production system, or also the feeding system, so what the animals eat on a daily basis. So what can we actually do to combat methane emissions from enteric fermentation? So the process, so this digestion process and the microbiomes responsible for the methane production in the rumen can be influenced by feed additives. And the feed additives influence this on different ways, depending on the active ingredient that is the additive is based on. I'll go into detail into that later. And the feed additive is added in very small quantities. So also depending on what we're looking at, between 1 or 40 grams per day and animal. So there is no need of an overall change in the feeding regime of animals. So it makes it quite easy to apply it for the farmers. And the technology offers two possible narrative changes, let's say, because farmers are, or like agriculture and especially farmers, are always seen as a problem when we talk about climate change, but they can actually also be part of the solution, which is very important to them, so that they can actually also contribute in the good faith, let's say. And then we also have the corporation, obviously, like in the dairy industry, but also in the overall agriculture industry, that have also the opportunity to contribute to climate action, either through financing projects by buying carbon credits, or also to initiate their own project in the value chain. And maybe you heard a bit about more, like you heard about feed additives a bit more in these later times, and also methane emissions were a bit more in media and everything. And this also has like some reasons why we talk more about this topic. First of all, we have a political momentum. During the last conference of the parties, the COP, 150 countries have signed the global methane pledge to cut methane emissions by 30% until 2030. Countries that have signed this pledge and who have also intensive livestock are obviously then also more likely to adopt initiatives in the livestock sectors, such as feed additives. Then, as always, we have also consumer demand, because consumers actually want to have more sustainable dairy and beef products. And this consumer demand also pushes then industries in the sector to adopt sustainable technologies such as feed additives. And we also see a lot of product innovation. So we see a rise of different, or like a merging of different feed additives that are coming and that are also pushing into the market. And at the same time, on the carbon market, we see that carbon standards are catching up and more methodologies are available and developed for this technology, such as the recent revision of the verified carbon standard methodology, and also the new gold standard methodology that also includes beef cattle and not only dairy cattle as before. So as promised, looking a bit closer to the available feed additive projects in the market, you see that feed additives can differ quite a lot depending on the active ingredient. As I mentioned, we have natural and synthetic sources of the active ingredient. Then we also have a different emission reduction potential. This is, you see the variation there. We have feed additives that have a emission reduction potential of like around 8%, and then also claims that go up to 60 or even 90%, even though this has definitely first to be proven in vivo trials, so with actual animals being tried. And then also we have a difference in price per ton of CO2 that can be reduced. In general, we see that feed additives or products with a lower emission reduction potential are also a bit cheaper, and then it goes a bit linear, more or less. And that's also, of course, a very important factor, the price of like what kind of products we actually can adopt in form like within a carbon project. What also often differs is the provenness of the project. As we say, obviously, when we develop a carbon project with feed additives, we have to demonstrate the emission reduction potential through peer-reviewed studies or direct measurements. So especially with the peer-reviewed studies, there are some feed additives that have been in the market for longer that already have all this provenness, they have trials and that we can already use. And then there are some that are still in the testing phase and that still some trials need to be done before we can actually use them with certainty for a carbon project. Then to jump into the carbon project in general, some nice illustration of how a carbon project with feed additives works. So we have our cows that exhale methane and that produce methane emissions. As I said, varies depending on where we have these animals and what kind of animals we're talking about. And then in the project scenario, we have a project set up, we give them feed additives. There is still obviously some methane expelled because we are not going to change the whole digestion process, but less methane is expelled. And so this reduction caused by the feed additive, we can then transfer them into carbon credits by applying these all these methodologies from the carbon standards. And then these emission reductions and these carbon credits can then be used for different purposes by different actors that are interested. Mostly, it's obviously a target sector for industries and actors that work in this sector as well, in the agriculture and livestock sector. And then into more detail, who participates in these projects. These are the different stakeholders. So we have the feed additive producers, of course, that need to provide the product in the needed region and quantity. And they need to deliver it to feed mills because the feed mills can actually directly mix the additive into the mineral feed or concentrates, which makes the application for farmers really easy because, as I mentioned before, they don't have to change anything because they can just buy their normal mineral feed and concentrates that has like this really small amount of feed additives in there, and that's actually it. So the dosage and everything is guaranteed by feed mills mixing it in. And then we have South Pole as carbon developer. We make sure that all requirements of the carbon standards are met, assuring the highest transparency of the emission reduction calculations that we're basing our carbon credits on. And then we have the project partner. The project partner is the link to the farmers and also the contact point for the farmers, because we as South Pole are not going to farmers and asking them about climate projects, because we just need a very strong network of farmers to do that. And yeah, so for example, project partners could then be aggregators with existing networks of farmers, for example, dairy cooperatives. And then most important, obviously, we have the farmers who participate. And the farmers are the most important partners because they are implementing the project activity and they report the necessary data for calculation. And this is why it is so important, as I mentioned before, to have this strong farmer network, an existing farmer network for such projects. And also that farmers obviously get corrected, remunerated, and receive the main share of the income from carbon credits, because they are the people who implement the project activity on the ground. Without them, we cannot implement any feed additive projects, and in general, any projects in the regen ag space. So this is very important, and that's why we also want to make sure that the main benefit of these projects goes to the farmers and not any third parties. Exactly. And then I would like to present our feed additive projects that we already have developed. So Southwall has this feed additive project registered under the Verified Carbon Standard, VCS. The project is situated in Switzerland, and all farmers from the dairy cooperative MU can participate. The feed additive that we use is Agolin, Agolin ruminant, and Agolin naturo for organic farms as well. Agolin is a natural feed additive based on essential oils and eucalyptus, so it is all natural. There is no synthetic ingredient in there, which makes it also a bit more accepted by farmers because they're not just going to feed anything to their cows. So we're very happy with this choice, and we expect first carbon credits in 2024. And yeah, we are very excited that we can finally offer this local project to our clients and make them help also to support these local initiatives.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Thank you, Uta and Anya. We are going to the Q&A session now, and I would ask you to turn on your camera again. There we are. And I would like to start with a question, probably for Anya. Anya, can you give more details on the soil organic carbon type or a concrete example of this project?
Yes, very well spotted. We just briefly touched upon it. An example for a soil organic carbon project is indeed Carbocert that I presented. So soil organic carbon is, in a broader sense said, as an explanation, a key element that determines soil quality. So to say, it is one part or a measurable component of soil organic matter. And even though soil organic matter only constitutes a very small part of the whole soil mass, I think it's around 5 to 10%, it is highly important because this topsoil layer functions as the carbon sink. And unfortunately, as mentioned also when I spoke about Carbocert, through human practices such as heavy or extensive fertilizing, a lot of this soil organic carbon was lost in the past, let's call it decades. And this is why Carbocert and projects like Carbocert help are so important, because they help farmers install practices that avoid exactly this, meaning the depletion of the topsoil layers, and improve soil quality overall, and hence carbon sink activities. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Anya. Then we received a question for Yasmin. Can carbon credits from feed additive credits be issued for Scope 3 reduction? I think this is mainly coming from food or dairy sector.
Yes, that's a very good question. Also a question that we are getting a lot. Feed additive carbon credits are obviously interesting for companies working in the food and dairy sector. And it's a bit like we have to make the differentiation between there. So companies can show that they financially support a project, an initiative, that they are in close connection with in the industry. And this financial support then would be through the purchase of carbon credits. But besides this financial support, it is also possible to develop a project with feed additives in their own value chain. So for example, if a big dairy player would like to actually reduce their scope 3 emissions, so the scope 3 emissions are the emissions that are in the whole value chain. So if they would like, for example, their milk producers or milk deliverers would like to include them in a project, they can develop a project with feed additives in their value chain, and then instead of selling the emission reduction as carbon credits, they can also allocate that on their emission reduction goals. Just if we just need to make sure that it's only accounted for once. So either it's accounted as carbon credits and sold to third parties who would like to do this financial support, or we have to make sure that it is allocated only in the value chain, and then the project initiator, let's say this big dairy industry, also finances the whole project and can only claim the emission reductions towards their goals.
Thank you so much. Then we have another question about biochar. Why do you mention biochar under agriculture but not under tech removal? I think this is for Anja as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Biochar actually has many applications, or let's call them use cases. So it's right that biochar is not exclusively to be mentioned under agriculture. Some benefits of biochar can also come from tech removals and some from nature-based credits. So for example, biochar can also be used in construction. Maybe a little bit of context here. Used in the right way, it can have, as mentioned, the agriculture benefits, so help retaining the nutrients in the soil, avoid droughts and floods, and similar benefits. But at the same time, the durability with in the tech removal space is a lot longer, where it can stay up to 1,000 years. So to sum up, there's no single specific use case. There's various ones, but for this webinar, we just put it under agriculture to give you an example of a specific use case. However, yeah, there's many more.
Thank you so much, Anja. Then we have another question about the Waldklimastandard. I have never heard about the Waldklimastandard. Can you explain what it is and what it makes special? Maybe Uta, can you take this? You're on mute.
Thanks. Yes, so the Waldklimastandard is a new standard that was developed by actors in Germany related to the forest industry. So it's really tailored to also the specificities and the particular challenges for that country. And yeah, through the Waldklimastandard, forest owners can invest in future-oriented afforestation measures through the financing of carbon credits. Yeah, and so forests can be made again climate resistant, stable, also against rising externalities. And here it's maybe also important to mention that it's a major challenge for a lot of forest owners in Germany to finance the reforestation of areas that are destroyed by the bark beetle, for example, or by other extreme weather events. And there is government funding available, but that is only covering yeah, a minority of areas. And so this credit through the Waldklimastandard, we hope, can fill this really important and dramatic finance gap.
Thank you, Uta. Then we have a question again about feed additives. Often those systems where feed additives are used are quite poorly in animal welfare. How do you balance this, and as animal welfare becomes more important for consumers? Yasmin, can you take this?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I fully understand the question. I also would like to mention that feed additives, before they are used, before they can be used as in a carbon project, they need to prove that animal welfare is no concern. So this is always a requirement for every carbon standard. And then in terms of how like the feeding system, or also like how the animals are held, this is obviously, is definitely a concern that we have to address. So first of all, also in the applicability conditions that are defined for each carbon methodology, the applicability conditions define what kind of farms are allowed to participate, and their animal welfare is obviously one of the key criteria that has to be assured. So animal welfare has to be assured according to the principles, the highest principles that we have. And this is also then proven or like tested, let's say, through the independent third-party audits called validation that happen before every project registration. So independent third party that is like paid by us, but the third party has absolutely no interest if the project is registered or not. They actually, first of all, of course, check if everything is calculated correctly, and then they also go to visit farms, and they visit the farms and see if these applicability conditions and the animal welfare is fulfilled. And this is also done on a recurring basis after registration, before carbon credits are issued. So this is independently checked by a third party, and obviously also we as South Pole are not interested in engaging with farms or also with project partners and aggregators that do not consider animal welfare as important. So this is already in our previous selection of who we want to work with. This is one of the main criteria that we look at. And then anyway, with each project on feed additives, it is within the project registration that this is checked. I hope this answered the question.
Thank you, Yasmin. Maybe just a follow-up question that we received. Are there any concern around the additionality with feed additives? Do we know that the production of making or producing the feed additives is not canceling out the amount of emissions abated?
Also very good question. And also there, the methodology is absolutely look at that. So we have to, for once, have to prove, or like we have to demonstrate that production and also transportation emissions of the feed additive are not canceling out the positive effects. And most of the time, so for example, for the project that I presented for Switzerland, the emissions related to production and transportation that we have for this project over the 7 years that the project is registered does not even account for 2% of the emission reductions that we achieved over these 7 years. So this is really minimal part that we don't even have to consider according to the standard, but we have to prove it to the standard, and this is also checked. But we also have to prove either by literature review or also by measurements, depending what is available, is that the feed additives do not add to manure emissions. Because obviously when an animal eats something, the digestion gets changed, that's what we want, but this can also change how the manure is composed and then also the emissions of the manure. This is also a requirement by every carbon methodology that we have on feed additives, that we have to prove that there is no increase in emission from manure. And for Agolin, for example, especially the feed ingredients from like the active feed ingredients that are in there, they prove that there is no increase in manure emissions.
Thank you so much. And looking at the time, maybe one final question, and please answer it quickly. Maybe it's for Anya. You mentioned positive impact on biodiversity. Can we expect biodiversity credits soon from South Pole? What would be the main challenges? And I think this has potential to be a whole webinar too. So maybe can you say something about the challenges, and maybe we can deep dive in the follow-up after the webinar.
Sorry, yeah, you're definitely right, Ramon. Can you still see me? now. Okay, yeah, you're right, Ramon. It has potential for a whole webinar. I tried to quickly go into the potential challenges. About the timeline, to be honest, I don't know, but we can follow up on this a bit more specifically in an email. However, the challenge is, I think, as you might know, the market is quite new, so to say, the market for biodiversity credits, and so to say also untested. It's subject to volatility and fluctuation, which can make it difficult for companies and also us to plan and budget the credits. And then just the nature of biodiversity makes it very difficult to measure it. So biodiversity is very complex and, so to say, multifaceted, and it can be difficult to define what to measure, how to measure it, and quantify it. So measuring biodiversity is definitely a challenge, which is obviously important if you want to sell a credit. And then also, I think additionality could be mentioned as a challenge, ensuring that the conservation projects funded by biodiversity credits are truly additional. This means that the conservation work of biodiversity should not happen without the funding. Additionality being a critical criteria also for carbon credits. And then, the prices, as it's a very young market, setting prices for biodiversity credits is not an easy part. It needs to be high enough to fund meaningful protection and conservation work, but also low enough that it takes up in the market and can start to be a functioning instrument to protect biodiversity. I hope that were a few insights, but as said, it's a very young market, and we're happy to follow up on the timeline on when to expect credits.
Thank you so much, Anja. Thank you to all the speakers and to all attendees for joining us today. As mentioned before, we will follow up and answer the remaining question via email. And if you want to sign up for the next webinars, we have a webinar about crafting your climate strategy in October, and then market trends and emerging opportunities for 2024 in November. Feel free to sign up. And with that, a big thank you to all of you, and hopefully see you soon.